said, almost 30 years ago. Today, our guest is the first architect we've had on campus for this series, and he is one of the principals of Morphosis. And so 30 years later, we have Morphosis here, which I think is really exciting. So let me give you a brief background of who we have today. As I said, he's a principal of Morphosis Architects with more than 20 years experience. He joined Morphosis in 2009 and has been involved in design and construction of several key projects. You've seen the flyers, perhaps. Throughout his career, he's played an integral role in designing and realizing several award-winning projects, including cultural, civic, commercial, residential, and master plans, spanning 4 continents and 15 countries. He recently completed design construction for the first museum in Morphosis overall, and that is the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in Dallas, Texas, and is currently working on several competitions, including a new U.S. embassy in Lebanon, the world's tallest hotel in Switzerland, and a world headquarters in Milan. Prior to joining Morphosis, he was the design principal with Studio Daniel Libeskind and for almost a decade, and played an integral role in the design and construction of many significant projects there in that Denver firm, including the Denver Art Museum, Royal Ontario Museum, and others. So please join me in welcoming Arne Emerson.
Hello, good evening. So I want to thank you all for inviting me here. It's great to see everyone out here. This is the first time I've been in this part of the country. I've been here for about 24 hours, so it's great to be here. I've had a little bit of time today to get to experience the city and meet with some of the students and see some of the classes and the fine work they are all working on here. So it's exciting that you've got some really great stuff going on here. And I've, of course, always known about the Black Mountain College that existed here quite a while ago, and that's even from in school when I was studying and at great liberal arts degrees. So I've always kind of known that there's been something great that's been happening here over the past decade, or actually probably a couple decades. So anyway, so thank you. It's really great to be here. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself first before I jump into the work. I know John gave me a brief introduction, but I ended up growing up in Wyoming, kind of in the middle of nowhere, as I like to call it, or at least it felt like that at the time. And I went to school in Bozeman, Montana, at Montana State University for between 1990 and 1995. At that time, I was, of course, young, studying architecture and looking at all the greats and trying to absorb as much as possible, understand actually what the profession is. I think when I walked in, I had absolutely no clue what architecture was, but I was interested in learning, and they stripped everything away from me that I learned in high school and kind of rebuilt you up into an architecture machine. So it's interesting, and I note these two images off to the left here that were an influence for me. One was a drawing from Morphosis, and another one was a drawing from Daniel Libeskind, actually 2 people who I ended up going on to work for that happened to be completely random, but they were an early part of my career, but I ultimately ended up working for both of them. After I graduated in 95, as some of you may remember, there was a recession. I tried to go to the East Coast or to the West Coast because there wasn't a lot of architecture happening in Wyoming. It's the least populated state in the U.S. There's only 400,000 people there, so there's a lot of barns and a lot of sheds, but there's really not that much interesting architecture. So tried to get jobs in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and New York, and nothing happened. So I ended up working in Denver. And while I was there, Daniel Liebeskind, who was in Berlin at the time, he had a very small office. He was an academic for a number of years. He ended up winning a competition to the extension of the Denver Art Museum. And ironically, the different competitors here included Daniel himself, but also Morphosis, my current boss, Tom Main, and a few others, Arata Isasaki and Stephen Hull. Some of you may know these names, some of you may not. So I was telling this to a few people earlier on that, how did you get from nowhere to somewhere, or I guess however you'd want to put that, is I landed in this project, and this project was a great opportunity for me. I realized that I was going to be working with a great mind in architecture and someone that really was a solid thinker, both on the academic side and also as a practitioner. So I kind of leapt on and jumped straight in and became a design principal with him for almost a decade, and traveled all around the world to many countries and worked on some fantastic projects, and really kind of changed me from the very small town that I grew up in to where I am now. I still have much of the same roots, but definitely had a profound effect on me. And so those are all the projects that I had worked on globally for him as I worked there. And now at Morphosis, my wife and I had made a change. We were living in New York for quite a while, and we decided we wanted to move to Los Angeles for some family reasons. And so we landed in 2008 and joined Morphosis and Tom Main directly after that, and here I am. So I've been a principal here for quite a while and working on some really great projects here. And while I was studying, again, like I said before, in university, I was looking at the influential architects and the generation in the 60s. People like Peter Eisenman, Bernard Tschumi, Richard Meyer, Daniel Liebeskind, Tom Main, all of these people, Eric Owen Moss, Neil Denari, all of these kind of great thinkers, Rem Koolhaas, that came out of the 1960s culture, this kind of counterculture. That was definitely much about questioning everything. They were against the grain, and they were influential because there was design and there was experimentation. And they were experimenting through drawings, through the medium that they knew, their skill set, which was drawings and models and detailing and construction. And there were more the academics on the East Coast that were doing just much more drawing, and then there were some that were on the West Coast, or the West Coast schools, like Tom, my boss, who was not only doing drawing, but he was digging in and building very small houses, and he was experimenting with material and color and shape and form. So it was those influences from those architects that I became interested in, because ultimately that was part of a process. The one thing that I said when I got into architecture, I had no clue what it was. And for me, as 20-some years later, I realized that architecture is about a process. It's all about a process. You set up a certain process, and with a certain set of parameters, you can work through that, and on the other end, you get something, kind of like a pasta maker, something like that, right? You put something in on the one end, and something comes out on the other end. You don't quite know what it's going to be, but you know you've got a system that's set in place for that. And so that's the process that I started to become interested in. And with that strong process, it demands a lot, because architecture, some people have coined it as the mother of all arts, right? It's not just a painting that can exist as a painting. Architecture has to exist in the real world. It has to be performative. You have to be able to stand in a hall like this and be able to speak and sit and listen, and it feels cool in here, and there are bathrooms and facilities and everything for life safety, all the stuff that you normally don't think about when you go in a building. So it's very pragmatic, but there are a lot of other things that as architects we try to overlay on top of that, like design, right? Because if we all just went around and designed very boring background buildings, none of us would be excited. I mean, we spend 90% of our time inside architecture. And, it's what I'm interested in is actually designing the architecture that inspires us, that inspires you, that inspires young minds to think, or old minds alike, or anything in between. So that's what's actually more interesting. And so as part of these diverse set of skills that we now typically employ throughout all of our process, this is very kind of common, I think, to a lot of architects, like how we're working, is dialogue. Dialogue is very important. Right? Dialogue is important because you need to understand who's saying what. You need to listen, right? A lot of times we do too much talking, and sometimes you just need to listen and understand what the context is. What is the political, what is the social, what is the economic dialogue, what's happening? The values. It's interesting, I always show this slide because, what is the context for the values? You look at an F-25 fighter and it's $124 million. You look at a building that we just realized in Los Angeles for $85 million. You look at that, it's about 1 1/3 total for that, right? And you look at how much goes into that and what you're getting. I mean, one Emerson College is providing education for over 1,000 students, and you've got one F-25 fighter that is, I'm not sure what it's doing. The public and funding. Having not really traveled anywhere when I grew up in Wyoming, we were kind of void of culture. Didn't really understand what culture was, and as I went to some larger cities, I understood a little bit more of culture, going to museums. But as I've gotten older, and I always start to travel the world, and you go to different places in Europe, and especially you go to France, they have a minister of culture there, right? They actually have somebody who cares about culture and defines what those expectations are, and they have funding for that. When you look at the funding for this graphic here on the left for HUD Housing, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, the EPA, and you can't even see it here, there's a tiny little dot for the arts, right? This is in between the dots. So this is funny, but unfortunately this is our culture, and this is something that we need to realize. This is something that we need to understand, and especially for you all, at this college here, you're going to become artists and visual artists and whatever you're doing. You have to realize that this is what you're up against. This country does not care about culture. We absolutely do not care about culture. We spend $161 million every year on arts. You look at the Department of Transportation, 129. You look at the U.S. defense budget, 685. I mean, this is crazy, right? These numbers don't even make sense. Something's unbalanced here. But when you go out into the world, you need to understand that this is what you're up against. And of course, the private sector, right? It's you've got the private funding. People that are building these massive mansions for $140 million. That large museums that we create sometimes don't even cost that much. But you've got a family that has private money that will spend $140 million to recreate an amazing piece of architecture when they should have just flown to France and gone to the Palace of Versailles, been inspired by that, and came back and actually found an architect to build something like them. But they completely lost the idea of what that means, right? So you've got people who just don't understand art, they don't understand culture, and they don't understand how much money they're spending and what they're spending it on. Innovation. Innovation is key, I think, for everything, for all the arts, and including with architecture. And, it's progress in technology is exponential. It's not linear. It's something that we ultimately have to use and understand what it is, number one, and then use that to apply to solving problems. I mean, gone are the days of me drawing with a T-square, right? We need to use much more intelligent software and ideas in order to understand what the problems are, right? So we need to understand what that problem is, use the software, use all the technology that we have at our fingertips to be able to help understand what that is and be able to move things along. A Tesla is absolutely a great example. I mean, Tesla has leapfrogged over. The concept of an electric car has been around for a long time. But what he's done is he's leapfrogged the entire industry, and now he's treating it more like an iPhone. When you go in and you buy one of these, my boss, Tom, has one of these. It's like going into an Apple store. You can be done in 15 minutes. You pick the chassis, you pick the color, you pick a few add-ons, they swipe your credit card and your iPhone, and you're done. It gets delivered to you 2 months later, 3 months later, and it's got an app on it. It literally drives more like a computer. I don't know if you just saw recently in the paper, but now it literally works like an app. So they download, there's a hands-free reverse to back the car in. So anytime he needs an update, just like your phone, they just send him a new app and it updates it, and then that's fine. So it's the technology and innovation like this that we all, as creative people, need to utilize and use at our fingertips to our advantage. And of course, engagement. Engagement today is critical. I was speaking, like I said earlier today, with a few students, and for a long time, architects suffered from the economy, and there was an infatuation with form-making for us. Architects, We found really great software that would produce some very amazing, sexy objects that we didn't quite know what they were. It was this kind of formal-based approach to things. And then after that, you would start stuffing the architecture into it. We need bathrooms, we need theaters, we need classrooms, and things like that, right? So it was much more formal-based, and you kind of shoehorn things in. But we need to still be able to utilize that digital technology, but we need to be able to understand and educate young minds that it's about problem solving, that engagement means getting together, talking, understanding the problems, identifying the problems, and then working through solutions. And then, of course, strategy. Strategy is a word that's so overused in my office, but it's what we do. Every time we go into a meeting or a presentation, it's all about what our strategy is. Going back to having no art or culture, really, or for funding in this country, being an American architect is very difficult because, every time you come up against a client and you're trying to show them a new idea, even in LA or New York or somewhere else, you're always met with resistance, much more so than you are than in China or Australia or Europe or even India or even Russia. So here, we actually kind of adapted this idea of you fight on the battlefield, but then you also talk. You have diplomacy as well. You have to fight for your ideas, right? As young designers, you can't necessarily get emotionally attached to your ideas, but you have to be able to fight for your ideas. You have to have a very clear, succinct idea about what it is and why you want to keep that. And you have to be able to fight for that. And fighting is more about negotiations, coming to the table and understanding what the client needs and making sure that somehow they get what they want, but ultimately you get what you want, right? That's the balance. That's ultimately the strategy, is that if you can marry the programmatics and the constraints and everything that comes from a client, whether it's from an artist, graphic design, visual design, architecture, engineering, if you can understand what both sides are, bring those two together and combine those, that's the best strategy to win. And so moving on, giving you a little bit of a back history of Morphosis and where we came from. I think John did a great job of introducing Tom in the office. And Tom is one of these people, he's a larger-than-life figure. He's 6'6", 6'7". He's amazing. He's a dynamo. He's 72 years old. Takes myself and 3 other principals to keep up with him. And he's had this energy since he's been 16 years old. He's absolutely amazing. When he graduated, he went back to Los Angeles. He started SCI-Arc, which is the Southern California Institute of Architects, which was this kind of very avant-garde, against-the-grain education for architects at the time. They weren't even accredited, but yet they were still attracting young minds who were just interested in the counterculture there. So at that time, he started Morphosis. And Morphosis was really founded as a multidisciplinary collective. And they really had a core set of values that was based on engagement and rejecting traditional beliefs and taking the idea of interrogating results and understanding what those results were. And sometimes the process is very messy, right? It's not a clean, wrapped up, homogenized process. It becomes very messy with models and drawings, and a lot of times you end up with open-ended answers and questions. And these are a series of drawings early on when they didn't really have any large-scale projects, but what they were doing is they were exploring, right? They were exploring with graphics. They were exploring with models. They were exploring with color and texture and mixed media. So at even any given time at that point, they were constantly pushing themselves to understand and to advance their dialogue. It was much more of a hands-on approach. I like to show these to you just specifically because you are an arts college, and you don't see a lot of architects who are dealing in art, and this is something that's integral to our process. And as I was saying, when Tom was doing this was in the 70s. There was what was called an LA school. Charles Jenks, he was a British writer at the time, and he was an architectural critic. And he said the LA school was and remains a group of individualized mavericks more at home together in exhibition in each other's homes. There's also a particular self-image involved with this non-school which exacerbates the situation. All of its members see themselves as outsiders on the margins, challenging the establishment with an informal and demanding architecture, one that must be carefully read. And so that was something that started many years ago in the late 70s that continues on today 40 years later, and it's by one person with Tom. And it's ultimately this collective of morphosis that he's built that is why people like me can step in and be a part of a very strong integral process and be a part of some amazing work. And so the work, I want to show you, I'm going to be a little bit all over the map. I'm going to show you some large-scale projects. I'm going to show you some that have been built, some that haven't been built, some that have just been competitions, some that dive much more into craft and technology, and others that really just show you some of the ideas and the strategies and engagement that I was just talking about. And I wanted to try to mix it up a little bit between mixed media, knowing what the audience was today, showing some movies and things like that, just to give you a sense for how we work, because we're being the first architects here, which I think is great. Thank you, John, by the way, to influence you appropriately. A lot of this isn't normal how architects work. If you saw some other architects lecture, you'd probably see some very different ideas and a very different process. So I'm glad you're getting to see this for the first time. So I'm going to start out with 3 master plans. One is in the Chinese University of Hong Kong in Shenzhen China. And I think most of you probably know where that is. So Shenzhen, they were looking for a new campus for 11,000 students, approximately 3 million square feet on a separated campus that was in Hong Kong, but they wanted to move it into Shenzhen. They had so many mainland China students that were coming into Hong Kong that it just wasn't working anymore. So they needed to find a brand new campus and define a brand new campus for over 11,000 students. So they chose a site in Shenzhen that was kind of backed up against the edge of the city and a natural park. And the challenge was for this project was to create a new identity for the campus, the new campus, but then also maintain the integrity of the existing campus in Hong Kong. And what I'm showing you here is a video that, interestingly enough, we never had a chance to present our ideas. So what we did is we put together an entire animation, a multimedia animation that would explain our ideas. And this is starting to show the lower and the upper campus of where it's located and how we were looking at our strategies of connecting the city and the 2 upper campus and lower campuses from the city edge and the park edge, and then taking the different schools that would exist there from science and technology to mathematics and management and economics, and connect those like a string of pearls, right, using the social public spaces as a promenade that would connect these two. And then ultimately overlaying 2 large exterior public yards like you see in Harvard Yard or Princeton or in Stanford. And then each one of those yards then would slowly start to become the identity for each one of the buildings in each one of the schools, right? All along they would become this idea that's integrated into the city and into the landscape. And the idea that it was backing up against this major parkland. So you had urban edge on one, and you had architecture on another side, and you had buildings in between, and you had to always connect these 2. So it's all about the notion of creating one overall master plan with several different visions. And one of the unique things about this project was that our strategy, again, I'm always talking about narrative and strategy, is we believed in higher education and the diversity in higher education. And because of that, this is a very large project. We were asked as Morphosis to do this on our own. There were 4 other competitors that were doing this. So this is a massive project. But what we decided to do is actually ask 5 other architects, something very unprecedented. In fact, the client almost told us no. But we felt that designing a new campus for higher education is almost something unheard of. You never get this type of opportunity. So what we wanted to do is immediately inject diversity into our team and into the architecture, and ultimately that would be injected into the final built form. So what you're seeing here is a number of buildings that were designed by 5 different architects, but there's one overall master plan hand, which was Morphosis. We were looking at where the buildings would go, where these 2 promenades would go, so all the public spaces. When you're master planning and you think about when you're walking around campuses, sometimes the exterior spaces are much more important than the interior spaces, right? The priority space becomes the public areas, the places where you'll have graduations, where you meet a friend for a lunch to study or do whatever. The buildings become containers for living and for teaching. but ultimately it's that exterior space that really becomes the livelihood and the heart of the entire campus. So again, looking at these ideas of diversity and intellectual exchange and sustainability is all something that a new 21st century campus should be. And ultimately, we didn't end up winning this. It was unfortunate. We were beat out by another competitor, but we did get some very interesting comments back from this, and we were definitely we were the crowd favorite on that one. Next project is located in Rabat, Morocco. This is for a high-speed rail station right in the middle of a UNESCO heritage site city. So it's a completely different project, and then once again, it will be the same process that I was talking about, right? Employing some of the same ideals. And so they came to us looking for an idea. They're now spending billions of dollars on connecting all of the major cities like Fez, Marrakesh, Casablanca, Rabat, all the way along with this new high-speed rail. And so the challenge for us was to create a new city center, not only a train station, but a new city center in a historic UNESCO city site that was literally part of integration of old and new, right? So how do we connect the two? And the idea here is starting to take the axes and starting to take the density that the client required, move this back together, densify everything, have more of an aggregation, and you create this icon that is really reminiscent of some of the old train stations like Gare du Nord, Grand Central Station, Union Station in Chicago, but some of these main social hubs that really became the heart and the nightlife of the city. And that's what we were trying to get for here, is really going for not only an icon, but then this interior icon of this train station. And the idea between that is we ended up winning, ideally. And again, it was something where we produced a mixed media presentation like that because we couldn't end up to our final presentation. So it's something like this where you think about, if you're ever going to be presenting to a client, some of you students, then think about how you can get your message across. The third master plan is a new U.S. embassy in Beirut that we're working on. We were just currently selected as one of the third firms that's working on one of these under the Design Excellence Program. There's the first one was the London Embassy, U.S. Embassy in London. The second one was in Mexico, and Beirut was the third. So it's taking these guiding principles of design excellence and working with high design architects and trying to create new diplomatic missions. And so, of course, the challenge with U.S. embassies is extremely interesting because you're dealing with geopolitical issues like U.S. diplomacy. You're dealing with economics, which is the American taxpayer. The job I'm working on right now, you all are paying for. I'm paying for. It's a $1 billion project. U.S. diplomacy abroad. What is our U.S. embassy mission? We have embassies in almost every country. History. History is probably the most important in Beirut because those of you that may know, in 1983 and 1984, there were bombings in Beirut and lives were lost and Marines were killed, actually twice. And so we're dealing with context here that is very somber, very straightforward, but also very real. And so the challenge was to create a safe and secure embassy that's open, it's environmentally sustainable, it's innovative, and ultimately it's the most efficient for the taxpayer. And so these are our core values that we have been using throughout the project. Because when you're spending the taxpayers' money, things take on a very different meaning. Every decision that you make, you realize that needs to be thought out very well. This gives you a location of where the project is in the city. This is downtown Beirut. There was an original bombing in 1983 of the Marine barracks, and several lives were lost with the Marines. They moved up north out of the city where the current U.S. Embassy site is in 1984, and again they were attacked with a bomb and lives were lost. So now what the U.S. Embassy has done and the Department of State is they've selected a new site. They've selected a 44-acre site that's located just off the U.S. existing embassy here. And it's quite a complex site. It's 44 acres. It slopes about 25 to 30 stories from one end to the other, from left to right. It's a total of about 2 miles as you walk the perimeter. So it's a massive site, very complicated. And this is this is the resultant. And this project has become interesting because there are so many constraints and parameters in this project. We've given a 15,000-page document of how to deal with security, how to deal with program, how to deal with multiple people living here and working here. We have all sorts of kind of secret classified things that we need to deal with. So there's so much parameters that to bring design to the table with a discussion is almost unheard of. So what our strategy was to say, look, since we're dealing with the American taxpayer money, this is a very important project for the U.S. and for the embassy, that we would use the constraints and the parameters to ultimately define the project. And that would become ultimately the aesthetics. Then whatever it looks like will become the resultant. All right, so instead of coming in and telling the American taxpayer, it looks beautiful, it should be here, it should be located here, and have red or green or blue, it's just the opposite for us. We're using those parameters to start to define all of the architecture, and so the aesthetics really become more of a contingent. And this gives you a little bit of an overview of an animation of this entire complex. So they've got a chancery here. There are 115 people that will be working here full-time that will be sequestered 2 years at a time. They cannot leave the compound for 2 years at a time. There'll be another 600 or so people that are local guards and local people who will be coming to work here every single day. So there'll be a total of 800 people here almost on a daily basis. We're literally designing for a small city. There's an ambassador that will live here, a deputy ambassador that will live here. Marines will live here. You'll work out here. You'll exercise here. You'll go for a run. You'll eat here. You'll buy your clothes here. You'll do everything here. You'll go to work. You'll sleep here. You'll play basketball. You'll do absolutely everything here. And so for us, the challenge has really been how to think about lifestyle, safety, and security, and efficiency, and just your day-to-day work environment, and how to match all of those together and take advantage of the climate of Beirut, which is absolutely amazing. It's a lot like Los Angeles. But unfortunately, these people can't ever go out to experience that. So it's our idea to try to take some of the traditional planning approaches to climate and architecture and hillside planning and start to employ those on our project. And so what you see here is a resultant of that, is a combination of all those different parameters put together and kind of come out on the other end, and this is what you've got. We're looking at different options of carving out the bottom of this podium and dealing with the client's requirements for a different program, retail, food and beverage, and different shops. And from the outside, of course, we're concerned how this building starts to engage the public, how it starts to engage the ground plan, and what becomes the identity. And you start to see here, we're looking at embedding some ideas of circulation all the way through the buildings. The arrow to the right is going straight down to the waterfront, and we're looking at carving out this continuous idea all the way through up into the two buildings and then out on the public steps on the other side. So if you're ever in cities, sometimes you can walk through one building and then you walk through another and you're completely transformed and you're on a different side and you've got a different vista. That's something that we were trying to do here, is literally kind of create this as a mixing chamber. And so when you're inside of it, you're always looking out. You're constantly reminded of the outside of the views, to the historical buildings, to the context, to the water, to the towers, and to the high-rise, and of course the bustling of people. This is a great shot, actually looking up from what would be the food court, looking up into our sky deck above. All right, and this starts to show you some connections at the ground plane of what we're doing between visual and physical connections. So for us, it's always about making sure we're creating these much larger connections between these spaces. There's transparency that we're dealing with. Opacity kills architecture and it kills ground planes. So the more you can open things up visually, the better. And so to the icon and to the tower, we're starting out with two existing buildings. The gray one on the front was the first one they built in the 50s, and the second one in blue was the one they had built in the 80s, but they wanted to partially demolish that. So we started looking at ideas of how to create a new building but keeping about 50% of the existing one. So what we did is started looking at building that up, and actually, as this shows here, we've got the blue above the purple. And then we've also got the gray one. So we've got three towers right there. And for us, what we really wanted to do was connect new and old. So what we did is we extended a sky deck that's cantilevered off at floor 26, all the way across, out to the edge of the water and over their existing high-rise building that was built in the 50s. And we wanted to create that as a public park. It was literally a 1-acre park. And we broke all the rules by doing this. We were given a very strict set of guidelines and an envelope that we could not move out of. But sometimes a big idea comes to you and it's so strong that you can't help but put that on the table. So when we did that, we created, in a way, almost a sense of these kind of multiple vertical gardens. There were 2 existing gardens, the Macquarie Place Park and Jessie Street Gardens, but then there were also a lot of these other new roof gardens that we were trying to create. So trying to activate multiple planes. And then ultimately this 1-acre roof deck that has a direct connection to the water and to the harbor and can be seen. It's a seen and be seen place. So, it's this kind of translation between public and private where you have a private company who's paying for all of this, but yet we're proposing to them, you should be spending $100 million to create a public park on top of your building. And the city absolutely loved it. The mayor was there, the urban planners were there, even a lot of our client absolutely loved it, but we kind of threw everyone up in arms because they didn't know what to do. We had broken the rules. But this would be one of the views, right? I mean, this is one of the most iconic views. Is you've got the Sydney Harbour Bay Bridge, you've got the harbor, and then you've got Jorn Utzon's Opera House on the right there. 2 just the most iconic images in the world that you see every time you see Sydney. We wanted to become that 3rd icon. Actually, the 4th icon. I think the 3rd icon is the harbor itself, and then we wanted to become the 4th icon. The sky deck, not the tower. And so you see here how we're trying to integrate between old and new and trying to use this sky deck that reaches out to the other, that just touches it barely, it just kisses it, but yet it provides that physical connection between the 2. So it's the power of this idea that actually it got us down to the 2nd stage. Originally they were supposed to pick 1 winner and 1 winner only. And the day that they came to select us, they called us. We had a very long silence, and they explained to us that they hadn't selected 1, but they selected 2. They absolutely loved ours, but it had broken so many rules, but yet so many people liked it, that they would continue on. They had another competitor who didn't break any of the rules, and they could easily pick them, and they could move on, but they were completely captivated by this idea of a 1-acre sky deck suspended 26 floors that cantilevers out 100 meters, which is 300 feet. So everyone really bought off on that idea, and that's the idea. That's how powerful an idea you can use to sell something. And so this is starting to get into a little bit of the kind of more technical aspects of the plans and of the building. And this gives you a plan of that sky deck. We've got a little bit of the tower and the core back behind, and we've ultimately got the sky deck off to the left. But just this massive plinth that sticks out over this void below and then directly unfronting the harbor, and you can see there how it just integrates well into the city and the context. Absolutely amazing. This was one of the best projects we had worked on. We had a client who absolutely loved it. And so what we had done, I end with a slide because they came back to us and they said, we absolutely love it, Morphosis, but we need you to look at giving it a nose job because it doesn't work. It doesn't fit the boundaries, and so we need to see what it would look like. And so we went back and we produced the model on the left. The model on the right was the one that we produced and we brought to our presentation. The model on the right, we took to them and we showed it to everyone. Everyone agreed that it wasn't there. It needed the full idea. So we jettisoned that and we went totally for the one on the right. And then they went into to deliberation, and Sydney's still a little conservative, unfortunately. We were dealing with a lot of money. AMP Capital is an insurance firm, and they invest money for other people. 401ks, they invest billions for other people. And they felt that the sky deck was too much of a risk. But the city, the mayor, the ones who are much more interested in the public realm and actually having a 1-acre sky deck suspended above, they thought was amazing. And it was bittersweet. It was very, very unfortunate because we had several clients who came to us afterward who said, if it weren't unanimous, we definitely would be working with you. But, again, this is the power of an idea. So whatever you're doing and whatever you go out and do after your careers, don't forget in the power of an idea. Always remember that. You can really change perception easily. Now on to another tower in Switzerland. I don't know if any of you have been to Switzerland, but this is located in a tiny little valley called Valls, Switzerland. It's a hamlet of a village of about 1,000 people that live there. been there since the 11th century. It's located roughly in like central Switzerland, equidistant between Zurich and Milan. This is the wrong image, okay. And here you can see all the inlets and all the fissures of all the different valleys, and Val's just happened to be located in randomly one of those. But this is the view, looking down the valley. It's a one-way in and one-way out. It's about 2.5-hour drive directly from Zurich. You get there, you get to the edge of the valley, and there's no way out. You have to turn around and you have to drive back. And so this was very interesting because we got this competition at the same time we were working on the one in Sydney. And the one in Sydney, we were given an 8,000-page document of everything that we had to include in this competition in a matter of 6 months. It was massive. We had so many drawings that we had to produce, it was unreal. Our fingers were bleeding at the end. But with this one, we got one simple letter from the client that said, we're dreaming of an idea, we're dreaming of something poetic, something lyrical, and this idea is called The Sky's the Limit. And we invite you, along with a few other architects, to come to Val's, to come to Switzerland, and talk to us about producing one of the top hotel destinations in the world. And for us, we don't typically do hotels. We don't do luxury hotels. In fact, we usually stay away from that. We do just the opposite. We're much more happy with museums and university work and high-rises, commercial high-rises, but we don't do luxury work. But it was the brief and the letter that they sent us was so interesting that we couldn't help but go. So we went. So you very quickly understand what the context is beyond the competition and the fact that, Val's has been around since the 11th century. And British explorers, this is a great painting by Caspar David Friedrich because it captures some of the essence of some of these early British explorers that were all over Europe that were literally just kind of tackling and mounting and discovering all of these different rooftops and mountaintops and all these peaks within the Swiss Alps. And then the other thing that is most important, and I don't have an image of here, is Peter Zumthor is an architect that some of you may have heard, but he designed a thermal spa in 1995 that literally put this small town on the map. And so those are our three contexts. So as we started out, we were thinking about sculpture. Giacometti is from this region, so we started looking at towers in a small valley. What would it mean to put a tower in the middle of a Swiss Alp that has nothing but a 4 or 5 story building there? Right? A client asked us to do this. So what do? Do you back away? Do you say no? Or do you take on the challenge? We took the challenge on because we're confident in our process. So this time we started looking at artists. Brancusi, Giacometti with his sculpture, his haunting sculptures. And then, of course, Robert Smithson with displaced landscapes, so putting mirrors in landscapes and trying to get different effects with how the environment is refracted. And then looking at ideas from Robert Irwin about lenses and light refraction. And what we ended up with was a very large tower in a very small village in a very large valley. And this is a 400-meter tower that's 82 stories tall that rises up out of the ground. And here you see the 2 peaks on the other side. But what's interesting about this is context. Everything is about context. It's all about relationships and surroundings. When you build a high-rise, a big, square, bulky high-rise in the middle of Manhattan, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Shenzhen, Berlin, wherever you want, most people don't even think twice about what that tower is designed for. Usually it's designed for economics. But for here, we were so sensitive to the fact that we were asked to design a tower within the Swiss Alps and a luxury tower. We knew that it couldn't just be any normal tower that we would design in a city. So we started looking at different ideas and our strategy of what happens at the ground plane and then what happens with the tower. How does it touch the ground? And how does it deal with the city? And how does it relate to the context? But then after that, how do we deal with what happens in the sky? What is that experience and what is that atmosphere? And so for us, part of this project became about defining a narrative and defining an experience. You know, we don't know what a 7-star hotel is. Our client wants to produce something that's so unique that no one really knows what it is. So again, that's where we fall back on our process. And the way that we started out is with the site. Again, with these very strong site connections. So this shows you a little bit of a zoomed-in image of the dashed line is surrounding several of the buildings that the client owns off to the left. And then off to the right with the blue dot is something, it's a park that's being designed by a famous Japanese architect. His name is Tadao Ando. And so he had designed this park here that it has everything to do with water and light and texture. And then we came along. And it was our turn to try to design a building here and design a hotel, this very tight site that needed to fit a 600,000, 500,000 square foot hotel. And so one of the things we did was looking at the site was this axis. As how do we kind of shoehorn this building in here, this new hotel to fit in? How does it become an arrival? How does it become a gateway, this podium piece? How does it relate to the existing buildings? Well, we maintained that axis from Ando's original idea, and we took that all the way through, meaning that it would connect nature to nature all the way through our buildings. Kind of like if you've ever been to Hong Kong, you know, a lot of the buildings in the high rises, there are the mountains back behind, and then a lot of times the high rises will kind of lift up their solid skirts to just have a glass box, and what that's doing is that's allowing the spirits, what the Chinese fields is allowing the spirits to flow through. So that's one of the similar things that we were looking at here, is allowing these porous connections for landscape to continue through both buildings all the way through. And this becomes your arrival point that is much more in scale and context with the city. It's providing a gateway that's cantilevering out, providing transportation, providing coverage, providing arrival, providing everything that you need to know as soon as you get here, and creating that unique experience. And that's that connection and that axis that's looking straight out up into the sky. And this is that other axis that's looking back. And so for the tower rooms, this was something that was probably the most important for us, you know, drawing on what we looked at with Brancusi and Robert Irwin, and thinking about a blade or a lens in the sky. How do we design this? What is the size and the shape of this? So you have the images off on the left, A, on the very far left. That would be a square, very typical, traditional high-rise where you have a square core in the middle that has elevators and cores and stairs, all those things. You have a kind of a circulation path around it, and then you have your rooms on the middle, on the sides, and it's pretty much equal. But for us, that was much too traditional. It didn't seem to really capture the essence of Val's and of this Swiss Valley. So what we did, right next to that, you see those three kind of pointed shapes. We kind of took a different approach. We started thinking about literally having one room per floor, right? So they kind of went on this, and we took one room and just started stacking it on top of each other. These rooms are roughly 2,000 square feet per floor. They're not a normal hotel room. They want luxury. So we're looking at starting out with 2,000 square feet, and we start working our way up. And we just kept going and going and going, and before we knew it, we had this very thin, slim, elegant tower that we pushed the core, all the core and the vertical circulation back to the right. That would then open up to the views of the valley. You'd have over 180-degree views sitting in your bed, completely suspended, 82 floors up above this valley. And the client loved it. During our midpoint presentation, we were pretty much sure we were going to get kicked out of the room because we were proposing something that wasn't 400 meters at the time, but it was very tall. It was probably twice to 3 times as tall what any of the other competitors were doing. But we were going for something big. The client had asked for something because the sky's the limit, and so we took them seriously. And so here you see how this fits into the context of the valley. And you know, it's interesting, when you see this, it's somewhat shrouded by the scale of the mountains around it. Yes, it is a tower, but it's probably one of the most site-specific towers that's ever been designed in the past 3 decades. In plan, it's only 40 feet wide. In width, it's only 80 feet wide. It's literally one of the thinnest, slenderest towers and smallest floor plates in the world. And these are some of the views that are looking out, suspended. And these give you views of the floor plan. So when you're in your bed, this is what it was all designed around. Sitting in your bed, sitting in your open suite, and having these commanding views. We even started looking at reducing the proportions of from the bed to the exterior wall. So every time, no matter what space you're in, the bathroom, the kitchen, your bed, the closet, you're always completely connected to nature. That was the idea. Ultimately, if we could remove the glass from the tower and let the walls of the valley become the walls of the tower, we would. If you could just put an air curtain there and have nothing else, that would be the idea. All right, that you're literally suspended in nature. And so that project is actually moving forward. That's one of the most exciting projects in our office right now. And we have a crazy client who loves the idea and loves us, and he's bought into it. So we're happily moving forward with that, and we're hoping someday soon that we'll have one of the tallest hotels in the world. But then after that, somebody will probably build something taller. I'm going to end with two projects that we've recently built in the past 5 years, one that I worked on, one that I did not. But to give you a little bit more sense of our design process, kind of more real process, real buildings, things have been built, taking you through our design process, fabrication, and ultimately craft and constructability. So the first one is for Emerson College in Los Angeles. And Emerson College in Los Angeles is interesting because it was founded in Boston. It's been in Boston for a number of years. It's a program in arts and communication. Famous people that have graduated from there are Jay Leno, Henry Winkler, Larry David. And they've been operating in LA for a number of years just as a satellite campus in a number of buildings that they've rented, but they have absolutely no identity whatsoever. But they're right in Hollywood. So the challenge for us was to create a first building, a first campus for them in Los Angeles, to create an identity for them in a very dense urban setting that is Hollywood. I don't know if any of you have been to Hollywood or been on Sunset Boulevard, but it's a very, very urban, rough, gritty. You feel it, right? And you're putting a campus there where people need to, students need to learn and live and work and sustain. So our strategy really was to kind of understand the site, the grittiness of the site and the realities of the site, but then also respond to the program, right? Understanding what does the client need? This is where the client comes to you and says, I want to produce a building. I want dormitories for students to live in. I want teaching classes. I want social spaces. I want workshops. I want multimedia halls. And I want all of this to exist in a very tiny footprint in an urban setting. All right, and I want people to be safe and secure because it's not in the best neighborhood. And so you see here are some of the plans that start to look at and diagram pushing the two dormitory cores off to the left and to the right. And what that did was immediately start to free up the center space, everything that was in the middle with these two dormitory towers on the sides. We could start to free up for social spaces and start looking for opportunities for the teaching classes in the academic rooms and everything that would happen there, the kind of heart, the social heart and the academic heart of the space. So that diagram came to us very early on, and it really kind of stuck with us because it worked so well. And so what you see here now, this is a realized version of this, is you've got the dormitories on the left and the dormitories on the right, connected with a bridge, a helicopter bridge at the top, which is required in Los Angeles for high-rises. And then below that, you've got these more curvilinear, kind of amorphic forms that start to form the academics and the teaching halls and the social spaces. And of course, Sunset Boulevard is very lively. It's very colorful. It's an amazing place. Like I said, it's dirty, it's gritty, but it's also great. You can get great food, and you can get anything, any time of the day. And so from the exterior, it's somewhat guarded, it's somewhat gated because students do live here 24/7. So we do need to have something that kind of takes people up and off the street level into a more serene, quiet space. And you start to see how some of these spaces start to interact with each other in between the dormitories and the classrooms themselves, and get a lot of these interstitial moves that are creating a lot of movement and play within the sunscreens. And what you see here off onto the right is literally a screen that's starting to act as a privacy shield between the dormitories. Off to the left, which are the classrooms, so you can have students that are walking all along. You subtly see the start to see the different movements in the walkways there. But that's kind of this metal undulating scrim that we designed and developed and worked with a fabricator out of Kansas City to develop this with our 3D modeling software. And you start to see these curving pieces in the middle here. Those are all of the academic wings where all the teaching classes are. And of course, in between these spaces where we have some bridges cutting across, this really becomes the social heart of the space. This becomes where you have kids are lecturing, they're hanging out, they're studying, impromptu performances, there's movie night. Up above here on the other side, there's a large screen that drops down with a huge sound system. They have Friday and Saturday night movies here. We've got barbecues. We've got a large tree and a large planted area. Been up there several times when they're doing yoga in the morning and they're watching TV and movies at night. So it's a very dynamic little internal mini campus that exists unto itself. And you start to see here with the process, we worked with some fairly sophisticated digital modeling software for 3D shapes. And one of the biggest issues with designing in 3D for us is how do you spit that out? How do you get it out of the box? Because it's still, even though it's three-dimensional in the box, it's still two-dimensional when you're looking at it. So we have a series of 3D printers, physical 3D printers, which I saw some people were working on today, which is great. I'm glad to see that you're utilizing that technology. So we've got something that's set up so between digital and physical, we have a pretty seamless process internally that allows us to design and try ideas and test them out over and over again. But then what's interesting about that process, and when you use that intelligence that we build into these models to build those models, there are also a series of fabricators that we work with that build concrete, metal, steel fabrication, roofs, things like this, that they basically can speak our same language. And we found one such company named A. Zahner, and they're out of Kansas City, and they're absolutely amazing. They are 21st century artisans, but they're steeped in 19th century craft. They started out as sheet metal workers, but they have slowly emerged, and now they're one of the most technologically advanced sheet metal workers in the world. People from all over come to them. And they literally take our 3D models and completely kind of rework them, and they put them through their rollers and through their kind of cutting and configurations, and they produce these absolutely amazing shapes. And so you see all throughout the design process, this is that scrim that's starting to screen between the housing and the public spaces. This is us working back and forth with them, trying to optimize the different panel types. This, for example, here is all the different panel types that we had, right? We had multiple panel types here, but when you're looking at using a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of metal, and you start seeing how much scrap and how much waste is left, here we actually started completely optimizing with our software to make every single piece count and not have one single piece of waste, which can potentially cut down your costs by anywhere between 10 and 15 and 20%. So it's starting to utilize, back to what I was talking about at the beginning about using the technology to your advantage. We're constantly using the technology to our advantage. Many people will come to us and say, what you're designing, what you're building is way too complicated. You can't do that. But we have the software and the intelligence, and we have the creative people who can actually make things like this work. And finally, I'm going to end with the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in Dallas, Texas. All of these buildings I've worked on except for the previous one, and this one was something that I worked on pretty much from beginning to end. I was very integral with this all the way through from design to construction. So I kind of lived and breathed this one and know it very well. So Dallas was interesting. And a little bit of context and history with this is that there were 3 existing institutions. There was a Museum of Nature, Museum of Science and History, and there was also an education museum. And the 3 of them early on decided they wanted to come together, come under one roof, find one project and one site, and actually have one identity for all of them, which is no small challenge. It's kind of amazing for them to do that, just to come all together after they've been existing for so many years. And they found a new site that was located in the Arts District right near downtown Dallas. I don't know how many of you have been there, but there's kind of an architectural petting zoo that exists there. There's very many great architects who have designed just down the block from where we are. And here you see that arts district off to the right with this main thoroughfare, and our site is directly located right in the red circle. So we're kind of bookending this arts district, but which is important to us because we're always interested in responding to context. And so here you see that initially this is kind of the big move of having a plinth, this kind of undulating plinth that starts to wrap up from the city and from the urban fabric that turns into a 1-acre landscaped roof. And then you take this very simple, straightforward, efficient cube or this tower that sits on top of that. That becomes the location for all of the galleries, almost like for black boxes. And in a way, the way we designed this is you've got a vertical circulation core and escalators that take you up the outside. And then you start to work downwards, counterclockwise, kind of like in the Guggenheim in New York. And I always like to show this because this is a series of one of many of our study models and our processes. You know, some of these here were very early ideas from the building, all the way from kind of small scale to large scale. But you know, during that process, so many things evolve and so many ideas evolve, and we're testing things so quickly that you'll end up with 200 or 300 models at the end of a project, and they all have singular ideas. But we've moved on from them. This gives you an overall understanding of the building program, but essentially it has large gallery spaces for black box spaces, and nature and history is very different than a fine art museum. They need much more interactive exhibitions for kids to jump on, rides for energy, running, sports, humans, universe, things like this. So it's something that's much more kind of akin to hands-on approach to the age from anywhere between 6 and 13 years old. The plans are very straightforward. We've got a very large lobby and open space that comes out from the main piazza. It stacks up fairly quickly and fairly straightforward in the cube. And here you see from the main entry plaza, we have one of the escalators, one of 3 escalators that takes you all the way up to the top. You enter in on the ground floor, which is right below. You come into this main space, and then you end up ascending through 3 different escalators, always giving you views and then taking it away and then giving it back again of the city and pointing back towards the arts district. And this big cut here on the side with the glass escalator is actually something that when we oriented, we wanted it to be oriented directly back out to the arts district. So when you come to the top and you're in the atrium, you're located and you're looking right back out onto the city. And here, this is the main lobby that you see here. We're really trying to blur the idea of interior and exterior between the landscapes and bringing the roof in and bringing the landscape out and vice versa. And this is the idea, you're looking back out onto the arts district into downtown, so constantly providing that physical and visual connection. So the fabrication process, which is probably some of the most interesting of this building, is we started working with a contractor very early on during the process. And we brought them on board, which is great for us because we're not only designers, but we're also builders, and we understand fabrication and detailing. And so we worked on a number of different mock-ups with them, all the way from the exterior to the interior of the building, looking at prefabricated service risers, customizing lobby ceilings. Here we found a guy who worked on Ferraris. We had an idea for a ceiling. We got it off the shelf, and he said, I can produce something way better than you, way cooler than you. I've got all these crazy rolling tools in my shed, and I can do something much better. And sure enough, he did, and he made it probably $15 less expensive than we would have bought off the shelf. So, working with and connecting with local people who understand how to build, is very important for architects, especially if you want your building to be built the way you want it to. But you also have to be willing and able to listen to people who want to change things, because sometimes as architects, we've maybe thought through it, but we just don't know what we're doing. We don't know what we're building, and we don't know what we're proposing. So it's good to listen to the construction side of things. And for us, this is the best. This is probably one of the most interesting, this exterior precast skin. We use precast concrete all throughout. And this really came from the idea that Dallas has concrete that is readily available. Typically, we propose steel on every single building, but they said not here, not in Texas, not in Dallas. We can do concrete very cheaply, and we're going to do concrete everywhere. So we really took that to heart, and you saw concrete in some of the earlier images. But for this, we started looking at really how do we dress up the skin? How do we make the exterior of this be very exciting? So we started using some of the software that I've been talking about, some of this parametric modeling, and how do we start to use that to create a composition and create a skin that starts to work with not only the ideas of what prefabrication is, but then also the ideas of precast and what their limitations are. And so we started working with a precast fabricator early on to understand what their limitations and what their sizes were. And through all of these images, what you're seeing is there's a number of very kind of simple panels and shapes that were designed here. And it's quite simple. We started out with 4 total shapes of panels, A, B, and C, and D. That's it. That's the entire building. And then we have a series of what you saw, those kind of ins and outs, those waves. We have a total of basically 12 of these different mold typologies. And then what we started to do was take those molds and take this kind of plug-and-play Lego system and just started to mix and match things. And ultimately, by taking a very simple, straightforward approach from what the precast fabricator had told us, all of a sudden we started coming up with these amazing composed pieces that were much better than we ever thought. You know, sometimes we don't really think this way, but then we got into their system so much and into their head that ultimately this became the best part of the project, is working within this plug-and-play system. This was one of the earlier mold precasts that we had done for them. We have a CNC machine at our office. And at first when they met us, they said, "You're crazy design architects from LA. We don't want to have anything to do with you. You're producing some crazy stuff." So it took engagement, right? What I was talking about earlier. It took engagement. It took us finally getting a piece of foam, milling it out on our mill, paying to fly this thing down. We drove down to their plant and we said, "Look, please pour this." And they did. They poured it, and that was the first step in the engagement. All of a sudden, we got them on our side. All of a sudden, they weren't scared of us anymore. These crazy guys from Los Angeles aren't so crazy. They listened to us. And slowly, it started to evolve. And these molds, this process is probably one of the most interesting because that's something they were the most afraid of. But they did this in such a low-tech way, the way that they created the molds for these, is they just took our 3D model, they sliced it up like a loaf of bread. They put the ribs on. They skinned it with a piece of moldable plywood. They poured resin in. Took that out, and they have what they called the rubbers. So these rubbers essentially became the plug-and-play system that would create all of the different panel types. And here you see the girl who actually did, in our office, Carenza, who actually defined all those weird and odd-shaped numbers that you see there. I think we drove them crazy with that system, but... So what they would do then is they would take these rubbers or these molds, and they would take those 4 panel types that I showed you, A, B, C, D, and they would literally start kind of composing these in there, how we wanted them to be composed. Very simple, very straightforward, letter by number, draw by picture, every same, no matter what it is, it was very simple. And they would pour the concrete over it, lay in some rebar, do it again, strip it, and they would clean these things, and they would reuse them again. And then this was some of the very first casts that we had ever done, and they were absolutely amazing. The client was quite scared, quite nervous what we were going to get, just because we're using gray cement that you use on the sidewalk. It was nothing pretty about this. But, slowly after we started to see the results of this process, people started falling in love with it. Concrete started to take on a completely different meaning and a different look. And it was something that was so new and so unique because it was customized. It actually came from us. It came from the team. It came from everyone. We all had a say in it. So it wasn't something that we bought off the shelf, right? It had our embedded ideas within it, and everyone did make comments, and they contributed to what you see now, even from the client side. And these are just some of the delivery and installation methods. And it was amazing. Everyone started loving the precast skin, all the way from the delivery guys to the guys that were installing them, because they went up very quickly, and all of a sudden, this way it went from this kind of drab-looking building to having this absolutely beautiful shaped skin on the exterior that started to become the talk of the town during construction. And all along the way, we were there. We had people who were at the office every single day working with them, working side by side with these fabricators and these contractors, and trying to understand how they work. And of course, during the opening, this was amazing. They hired these acrobats that literally they were so inspired, they wanted to dance up and down our building. So they actually wrote a play and did this entire choreograph where they danced around 2 sides of our building. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's incredible. And then the realization. I have a number of slides here, but I'm just going to power through these so you can just see them, and I'm not going to say too much. What's amazing about working on these buildings is at any given time, from beginning to end, there are probably anywhere between 100 to 300 to 500 to 700 people working on a project, whether it's during design, pre-construction, or during construction. And it's amazing to see everyone coming together to actually bring one vision to life, and everyone gets on board with it. It's probably one of the most unique experiences that I've ever been involved with. And the beauty of working on museums is that once a building does open, you can have parties and you can see people actually interacting with the space, because a lot of times with private buildings, you don't see how people interact. You design it, they close the doors, and that's it. And that's it. Thank you.